Hello everyone, it's Patri. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be sharing with y'all the books I read in February. February is the month of love and also Black History Month, so I tried picking books with that in mind. I read 7 books this month and started 2 that I'm currently reading, so I'll be talking about 9 books. The first book I read is probably the world's most well-known tragedy/love story, and it's a play. Can you guess? It is Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. A lot of people have read this in high school or college, but none of my classes ever assigned it, and it's kind of embarrassing that I haven't read Romeo and Juliet, so it was a perfect pick for February. I read it with my friend for our book club, and it seemed fitting to read it during the month of love. I'm sure we all know what Romeo and Juliet is about. 2 lovers are driven apart by the hate their families have for one another, but they insist on being together. So they come up with a plan to be together, and that plan goes tragically wrong. It was actually easier to read than I expected a play from the 16th century to be, so I really enjoyed it. I've read other Shakespeare plays before, but I read them in a classroom setting, so the readings were guided, so I was a bit intimidated going into Romeo and Juliet all on my own, but I actually understood it, so yay! I enjoyed it lots. It's hard to rate this play, but I rated it 4 stars. The next book I read was the book chosen for the other book club I'm part of, and that is Wiseguy by Nicholas Pileggi. I talked about it recently in my Valentine's video with my boyfriend, so I'm just gonna briefly go over it. This book is an account of Henry Hill's life as part of the mafia. He was part of one of the largest cash robberies committed in America at the time. So we learn how he got into this lifestyle, what they used to do, how it all fell apart, and we also get to hear stories from his ex-wife and his mistresses. Nicholas Pileggi interviewed them all, so everything told in this book is real. I don't like violence, especially when it's described in detail, and on top of that, knowing that all of this is real and it's not fiction made me a bit uneasy, so I actually listened to the abridged version, which got rid of a lot of the graphic details. And yeah, it was entertaining to listen to the book, but I feel like the story had no real resolution or lesson given out. The movie Goodfellas is based off this book, and I watched it for the first time after reading the book, and I enjoyed that a bit more. I think the way the story is told just fits better with a movie format. The movie is very well made and very accurate. Like, if you don't want to read the book but you're interested in it, you can just watch the movie. I usually never recommend that, but you really can in this case, and I rate this book 3 stars. The next book I read I've actually owned for forever, and it's been around booktube for quite some time, but I finally picked it up and buddy read it with my sister, and it's The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. The sequel just came out this past November, so it was about time I picked it up. In this book, we are following 6 people in New York, and each one of them is an avatar for a borough of the city. So each borough, like the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, they're all embodied by a person. And when a city finds a person, it means that that city is being born. So the driving plot of the story is that there's an entity from another universe that's trying to stop them from fully being born. As a city, they're already like humans that are born. They're just, the entity's trying to stop them from becoming the embodiment of a city. There we go. At first, it took me a bit to get into, and I was confused, but I think that's the audiobook's fault. The audiobook had sound effects during the first chapter and music, and I was just a bit confused about what was going on and a little distracted, but eventually I got really into it. I really enjoyed the story and the build-up throughout the book, but I feel like by the time we got to the end, it felt underwhelming and anticlimactic. I guess N.K. Jemisin was just building it up for the second book, but it took me out of the story, So I would give this book like a 3.5 stars. It doesn't quite meet that 4 stars mark for me, so on Goodreads I will be rounding down to 3 stars. This next book is another one that's been around for a while, especially in the booktube community. It was gifted to me by a family member, so I finally got to read it, and that is We Should All Be Feminist by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is an essay adapted from a TED Talk she gave in 2012. It was a very digestible read, and I think it explains feminism in a way that others who don't think we should have feminism could understand. There are no new groundbreaking ideas, and it doesn't delve into the complexities of inequality, but I do believe it's a really good conversation started, and I think everyone should take the 30 minutes out of their day it takes to read this little tiny book. The next book I read is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. In this book, we are following Sydney Green. She lives in Brooklyn and her neighborhood is being gentrified. Her neighbors that are being bought out / kicked out of their homes are disappearing. Her neighbors aren't telling anyone that they're selling their homes. They aren't saying goodbye to people they've known their entire lives before a new couple moves in, a new white couple. In comes Theo, who is one of the people that has recently moved to Brooklyn. Although he's on the other side of this problem, he starts noticing that things in the neighborhood are weird. So Sydney and Theo start working together to uncover what's really going on. This book was so entertaining in my opinion, and the way Alyssa Cole portrayed gentrification in this thriller was so clever and spooky. Think Get Out the movie vibes. The ending came out of nowhere and it felt a bit cartoonish, and a lot of people agree with that, and that's definitely the main criticism that I saw, but it didn't make me dislike the book by any means. This is Alyssa Cole's first time writing a thriller, so I'm sure some of the problems with the pacing came from that. But I really enjoyed the reading experience of this book. It had me feeling curious and really wanting to know what the big conspiracy was. It's my first time reading Alyssa Cole, so I'm really looking forward to picking up one of her romances now. That's her element, so I'm sure they will be amazing. There is a romance in this book. I know some people don't like thrillers with romances in them, but I'm a romance reader, so it was not a problem for me, and it actually made me like the book more. I rate this book 3.5 stars, but for Goodreads purposes, I will be rounding up to 4 stars. This next book I'll be talking about is my favorite book of the month and the highest rated. It is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This book is just wow. In this story, we are following 2 half-sisters that are separated when they are babies, and they each go on to live very different lives. One of the sisters, Effia, is married off to a British officer, and the other sister, Essie, is sold into slavery and taken to America. The book goes on to alternate each chapter between the next in line of each sister's family tree. We see the slave trade in the Gold Coast, the complexities of tribe wars, the wars between the Fonte and Asante nations, now known as Ghana, against British rule, and Ghana in the late 20th century. In America, we see slavery in the South, the Civil War, the Great Migration, imprisonment as a form of slavery, the opioid crisis in the 60s, and the turn of the 21st century. This book is so powerful because, as I mentioned, so many different periods of time are covered, but Yaa Gyasi is able to communicate so well through her characters the suffering and the everyday life Black people had to endure and still have to endure. It also really makes you realize that this generational suffering is a cycle that stems from slavery, and still to this day Black families are living the effects of that. What the British did in Africa and what the US did here is part of the structure of each country's society, and the consequences are still being lived out. It's not something that has ended. Like, slavery and the civil rights movement were not that long ago, and I knew that, but absorbing that in the format Homegoing explains it through is very eye-opening, and it truly makes you realize how not that long ago all of this was. I could keep going on about this book. Not only is it so powerful, it's very beautiful. It explores motherhood, sisterhood, familial bonds, and each character feels so real. Each generation is so well developed that all 14 of the characters feel just as important as the other. This book is truly a masterpiece because it covers so much in just 300 pages. It took Yaa Gyasi 7 years to write this book, if I'm not mistaken, and you can just tell the care and love she put into this book through the quality of the writing, the storytelling, and just everything about it. I gave this book 5 stars, of course, and I hope to read more books by the author. Also, this book was part of my scratch off poster challenge, and I picked it up without realizing that, so that was a nice surprise. The last book I read in February is called Must Love Books by Shauna Robinson. In this book, we are following Nora Hughes. She works for a publishing house as an assistant, but they publish business books and textbooks, so it's not really the dream job she envisioned for herself after graduating college. She's been stuck in this role for 5 years with no path towards promotion. She's underpaid, she's overworked, and she's just really unhappy with her current life. What she sees as a failed career has even impacted her love for books. She's in the biggest reading slump of her life, and she just feels very lost. She gets wrapped up in some unethical activities in the publishing world, and while she's trying to balance that, she's also trying to balance her friendship and growing relationship with an author that is a client of the publisher she works for. I would recommend y'all look up the trigger warnings because there are some heavy themes in this novel. But overall, I think Nora as a main character can be very relatable at times. And although sometimes you want to shake her and give her actual advice, you can't help but sympathize and understand where she's coming from. I think Shauna Robinson captured pretty well what it's like to be in your 20s and a lot of the uncertainty that comes with this period of time in your life. I enjoyed this book. I would say after a while, it felt like Nora, our main character, was repeating a lot of the same mistakes and kind of repeating her feelings about things over and over. So at times the book felt redundant. I also picked it up thinking it was a romance, and although there is a romantic relationship that develops, it's not really a romance novel. Books really need to stop advertising themselves as romance novels when they aren't, because it's getting really tiring. But yeah, although the love interest was really sweet and they got along well and I liked them together, it still felt a bit flat for me and I wanted more from that aspect. Overall, a good book, and I would give it 3.25 stars, so I'll be rounding down to 3 stars. The next 2 books I'll be mentioning I started reading this month, but I haven't finished them. The first one is Big Machine by Victor Lavalle, and it deals with a bit of sci-fi, a bit of mystery, and also a cult. So super interesting. I can't wait to finish and get all the answers that I'm seeking, and I'm about halfway through. And then the other book that I started reading is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. It deals with a relationship that has a 20-year age gap, and they get married 6 months after meeting. And I think the rest of the story will go on to tell how their lives are affected by this decision. So yeah, stay tuned for my March wrap-up to know more about these 2 books. And this concludes my February wrap-up. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have or will read any of these books. I would love to know. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!